When I moved into her house, I expected rules. What I didn't expect was the way she'd look at me one evening and say, "If you behave, I might reward you." And that single line changed everything between us. When I first carried my boxes up the narrow staircase to the flat above her home, I didn't think much about who she really was. To me, she was simply the landlady, a woman with kind eyes, a firm handshake, and a voice that carried a calm authority. Her house smelled faintly of cedar and something warm lingering from the kitchen, as though the walls themselves had soaked up years of quiet dinners and soft conversations. That first evening, I hadn't planned on seeing her much. I thought I'd unpack, maybe eat something quick from a takeout bag, and settle in. But when I came back downstairs to bring her the signed lease, she glanced at the plastic container in my hand and shook her head with a half-smile. "Not in my house," she said, her tone gentle but decisive. "Sit down. There's food enough for two." Before I could protest, she was already setting out plates on the polished wooden table. The kitchen was warm, filled with the faint hiss of something still simmering on the stove. She moved with a quiet grace, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back loosely, the kind of casual elegance that didn't need effort. I sat, trying not to feel out of place, while she spooned pasta onto my plate, the scent of garlic and basil rising in soft waves. I noticed her hands, the way her fingers curved naturally around the serving spoon, steady and sure. She placed the plate in front of me and gave me a look that was both commanding and amused. "You're very polite," she said as I thanked her, almost too formally. "Most men your age would already have their elbows on the table and their phone out. You sit straight, speak softly, almost like you're afraid to upset me." Her smile widened, just a fraction, as though she enjoyed testing my composure. I swallowed, unsure whether she was teasing me or simply observing. I just didn't want to impose. That's when she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms lightly across her chest, and said the words that would stay with me long after the dishes were cleared. "Well, if you behave, I might reward you." It was spoken playfully, her eyes glinting with quiet humor, but the sentence landed differently inside me. It lingered, stirring something I couldn't quite name, not desire exactly, but awareness. An awareness of the subtle line between us, of the age in her gaze that came with confidence, and the youth in mine that made me hesitate. The meal went on with light conversation. She asked about my classes, my work schedule, the things young people were into these days, as she put it. Yet every now and then, her glance would linger a moment too long, or her smile would carry that same unspoken challenge. By the time I returned upstairs, I wasn't just unpacking boxes anymore. I was replaying her voice in my head, that half-teasing promise, wondering what exactly she had meant, and why the thought of her reward left my chest feeling warm and restless all at once. Living in her house quickly became more than just paying rent. It felt like stepping into a rhythm she had long ago perfected: neatness, order, and a kind of quiet harmony that carried through every room. She had rules, but they weren't written down. They were spoken softly, as if she trusted me enough to follow them without question. The first came on my second night, when I rinsed my plate but left it in the sink, planning to wash it later. By the time I came back downstairs, it was already spotless and drying on the rack. She looked up at me with one raised brow, her lips curved in something between amusement and reproach. "Don't leave dishes overnight," she said simply. "It's bad energy for the morning." I nodded, feeling almost like a schoolboy being gently corrected by a teacher. But there was no sharpness in her voice, only expectation, steady and calm. Another rule came when I played music one afternoon, not loud, but just enough to drift through the open window. She appeared at the doorway, folding a stack of laundry against her hip. "I like your taste," she said, pausing with a smile. "But let's keep it low after 9. The walls here carry sound further than you'd think." Each rule was small, reasonable, and yet, every time I followed them, I noticed the way her eyes softened. A quiet acknowledgement, a smile that lingered. Sometimes, when I handed her a washed dish or turned the volume down without being asked, she would touch my arm lightly, just the brush of her fingertips, like a silent thank you. One evening, close to midnight, I found myself still at the kitchen table with my laptop open, papers scattered around. I was tired, frustrated, trying to finish a draft for work. The room was dim, lit only by the small lamp above the sink. That's when I heard her footsteps. She came in wearing a loose cardigan over her nightclothes, hair falling in softer waves around her face. "Still awake?" she asked, her voice low so as not to break the quiet. Without waiting for me to answer, she put on the kettle. A few minutes later, she slid a mug toward me, sitting across the table as the steam curled between us. Her knee brushed mine under the table, a small, accidental touch, but neither of us moved it away. "You surprise me," she said after a sip of tea. "Most men your age would have already tested my patience by now. But you're different." I felt the weight of her gaze, steady and approving. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly, but something deeper, recognition, perhaps even pride. Her words made my chest tighten with a quiet warmth, the kind that grows slowly and refuses to leave. We sat like that for a long while, our cups empty, the silence comfortable. And when she finally stood, gathering the mugs, she glanced at me once more. Her smile was small but certain, and I knew I would do anything to keep earning it. It was a Thursday evening when I first saw her differently. The house was quiet, rain tapping steadily against the windows, and I was upstairs trying to read. A faint sound drifted up through the floorboards, soft music, low and soulful, something older than anything I usually listened to. Curious, I followed it downstairs. The light in the living room was dim, only a single lamp glowing in the corner. She was there on the couch, her legs folded beneath her, a glass of wine resting in her hand. For the first time since I had moved in, her hair wasn't tied back. It fell loosely around her shoulders, softening the sharp confidence she carried during the day. She looked up when she noticed me, her lips curving into a faint, tired smile. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No," I said, stepping into the room. "I just heard the music." She gestured toward the chair opposite her. "Sit. It's too quiet in this house most nights. Company doesn't hurt." I sat down, though something in me felt hesitant, as though I was intruding on a private moment. The music played on, slow piano, faint strings, and for a while, neither of us spoke. She swirled her wine absent-mindedly, eyes fixed on the glass. "This place," she said finally, her voice softer than I had ever heard it, "feels too big sometimes. Too many rooms, too much silence." She laughed gently, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You'd think by now I'd be used to it. But some nights," her words trailed off, unfinished. I didn't know what to say, only that I hated the way her voice carried that quiet ache. So I shifted closer, settling on the couch beside her instead of the chair. My shoulder brushed hers, and though I expected her to move away, she didn't. For a long moment, we sat like that. I could feel the warmth of her through the thin knit of her sweater, the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the sharper note of red wine. She sighed softly, resting her glass on the coffee table. "Don't read too much into it," she said after a pause, her tone returning to something lighter, almost playful. "I'm just sentimental on rainy nights." But her words didn't undo what I'd seen. The way her eyes had softened, the quiet loneliness she carried beneath her strength. Then, almost as an afterthought, she glanced sideways at me, lips curving in that half-smile again. "Still," she murmured, "as long as you behave, we'll get along fine." The word behave lingered differently this time. It wasn't just a rule or a playful jab. It carried weight, a double meaning that left the air charged between us. When I finally went upstairs later that night, I couldn't shake the memory of her shoulder warm against mine, the sound of rain outside, and the quiet realization that beneath her composed exterior, she was far more human and far more vulnerable than I had ever guessed. By the fourth week of living there, I had fallen into her rhythm. I kept the house tidy, followed her quiet rules, and found myself looking for little ways to help without being asked. Maybe it was gratitude, or maybe it was something harder to admit. That Saturday afternoon, I noticed one of the shelves in the hallway sagging slightly, a loose bracket threatening to give way. While she was out in the garden, I found a screwdriver in the drawer, tightened the screws, and reinforced the wood. It wasn't much, but when I stepped back, it looked steady again. I didn't mention it. I hadn't done it for recognition. But she noticed anyway. That evening, as I came downstairs, she was waiting in the kitchen with her arms folded, leaning casually against the counter. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway shelf, and then back at me. "You did that?" she asked. I shrugged. It was about to fall. Didn't take much. Her lips curved into that familiar, knowing smile, the one that always seemed to carry a secret. She walked closer, her steps unhurried, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. You really are full of surprises, she said softly. Most tenants wouldn't lift a finger unless something broke completely. She let the silence stretch before adding, with a faint spark of humor. Since you've been so good, I suppose you deserve a reward. The way she said it sent a ripple through me. Playful, yes, but laced with something warmer, something deliberate. She stood in front of me now, close enough that I could see the fine lines near her eyes, the faint gloss on her lips, the way her perfume drifted like a whisper between us. Her hand came up, brushing lightly through my hair as though testing its softness. Her fingers lingered at the crown of my head, a gentle, almost motherly gesture, yet filled with something far more intimate. My chest tightened at the touch, at the calm authority behind it. Then, before I could even process the moment, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to my cheek. Not a hurried peck, not casual, but slow enough, warm enough, that it seemed to echo long after she pulled away. There, she said, as though she had settled something. Consider yourself rewarded. I must have looked stunned, because she laughed quietly, shaking her head as though amused by her own boldness. But when she turned toward the counter, I caught a flicker of color in her cheeks, as if she hadn't entirely planned it herself. I stood rooted in place, my cheeks still tingling where her lips had been, my pulse racing faster than I wanted her to notice. That night, lying awake upstairs, I replayed it again and again, her hand in my hair, the warmth of her kiss, and the unspoken truth that whatever game we were playing, it had just crossed into something neither of us could pretend away anymore. After that night in the kitchen, nothing was quite the same. She didn't mention the kiss on the cheek, and neither did I, but it lingered between us like an unspoken memory. Every time I passed her in the hallway, or caught the faint trace of her perfume in the air, I felt it again. The softness of her lips, the warmth in her voice when she'd called it a reward. But with that warmth came confusion. Was it just kindness? Playfulness? Or had she meant more? I couldn't stop wondering, and the more I thought about it, the harder it became to act naturally around her. She must have felt it too, because she started keeping a little distance. Our conversations grew shorter, more practical. She'd ask about rent, about the mail, about whether I'd locked the back door. Nothing personal, nothing that gave me a glimpse beneath her calm exterior. If we were both in the kitchen, she would move around quickly, busying herself with tasks, almost as though staying still might invite too much silence between us. But silence had a way of finding us anyway. One evening, I was in the kitchen pouring tea when she came in. I slid the cup toward her without a word, a small gesture I had grown used to. She accepted it with a nod, her fingers brushing mine on the handle. It was only the lightest touch, accidental at first, but neither of us moved. For a heartbeat too long, our hands remained there, her skin warm against mine. The air seemed to thicken. I looked up and found her eyes already on me, unreadable in the dim kitchen light. "This isn't," she began, her voice low, uncertain. She paused, withdrawing her hand slowly as though every inch of space mattered. "This isn't what I planned for us." The word struck me harder than I expected. Planned. It meant she had thought about it, thought about me. Yet the restraint in her tone was undeniable, as though she was building walls even as she admitted the truth. I wanted to say something, that I didn't care about plans, that I wasn't a child, that what I felt wasn't confusion but certainty. But the words caught in my throat. She took a step back, sipping her tea as if nothing had happened, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her. I stayed quiet, and so did she. The clock ticked faintly in the background, each second dragging heavier than the last. When she finally turned to leave, she glanced at me once more, her expression caught between warning and longing. "Good night," she whispered, softer than I'd ever heard her say it. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the taste of tea on my tongue and the sharp ache of something I wanted but wasn't sure I was allowed to reach for. The storm arrived suddenly, with heavy rain hammering against the roof and wind rattling the windows. I was upstairs, trying to focus on my work, but the sound kept pulling me away. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. I found my way downstairs, phone in hand, only to see the faint glow of candles already lit in the living room. She was there, kneeling by the low table, striking another match. The soft light cast golden shadows across her face, softening every line, every detail, until she looked almost unreal, like a painting come to life. You're prepared, I said, my voice quieter than usual, almost reverent. She glanced up, her expression calm. You live in a house this old. You learn to keep candles close. I sat across from her, though the room felt smaller than ever with the storm pressing against the walls. The rain was steady, the wind sharp, but in that circle of candlelight, everything seemed muted, just the two of us, caught in a moment neither of us had planned. She leaned back on the couch, one arm draped loosely over the cushion. It's strange, she murmured, her gaze flickering to the window. Storms make me feel both safe and unsettled at once. Safe inside, unsettled because it reminds me how small we really are. Her voice was softer than usual, her guard lowered by the intimacy of the dark. I found myself studying her face, the way the candlelight flickered in her eyes, the way her lips pressed together like she was holding back words she couldn't quite say. I took a breath, my chest tight. Can I tell you something? Her eyes returned to mine. Go on. I don't see you as just my landlady. The words left me before I could stop them, and once spoken, they seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the storm outside. Her gaze held mine for a long, unbroken moment. Then she closed her eyes, exhaling slowly, as though the truth had been waiting for her all along. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered. Her voice trembled, betraying the conflict she'd tried so hard to hide. But it's the truth, I said quietly, leaning forward, my elbows on my knees. And I don't want to keep pretending it isn't. For the first time, she didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the table, her hand searching for mine. When her fingers finally found me, they curled around with a firmness that felt both desperate and certain. And if I rewarded you for that honesty, she said, her voice low, almost breaking, would you still behave? Her question wasn't playful this time. It was raw, vulnerable, almost pleading. My heart pounded, but I didn't let go of her hand. I tightened my grip instead, steady and sure. The storm raged on outside, but in that circle of flickering light, the only thing I felt was the warmth of her palm pressed against mine, a promise unspoken, a boundary finally crossed. By morning, the storm had passed. The house was quiet except for the steady drip of water from the gutters outside and the occasional creak of the old wooden beams settling after the night's winds. I woke slowly, still replaying the memory of her hand clasping mine across the candlelit table, the weight of her question, would you still behave? Echoing in my chest. When I came downstairs, the smell of coffee met me before I even stepped into the kitchen. She was already there, standing by the stove in a light robe, her hair loosely gathered, wisps falling free around her face. The early sunlight poured through the window, wrapping her in a glow that made her look softer, almost younger. Morning, I said, my voice still rough from sleep. She turned slightly, offering a small smile. Morning, I thought you might like breakfast. Stormy nights make people hungrier, don't they? Her tone was casual, but the air between us wasn't. It carried the weight of the night before, of the honesty we could no longer pretend away. I moved closer, leaning against the counter beside her as she stirred eggs in the pan. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just watched her, the way her hands moved with practiced ease, the way her shoulder brushed mine lightly as she shifted. The warmth of her presence filled the kitchen more than the sunlight or the smell of coffee ever could. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers on the wooden spoon. She froze for a second, the movement in the pan halting, but she didn't pull away. Slowly, she let her hand relax beneath mine, and I felt her exhale, quiet and steady. I'm not pretending anymore, I said softly, my words barely above a whisper. She turned her head just enough for our eyes to meet. There was no mask this time, no teasing smile, no carefully measured distance. Only her, open, searching, and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. Maybe it's time I stopped pretending too, she whispered back. She leaned gently into me, her shoulder pressing against my chest, and for a long, still moment, we simply stood there, two people wrapped in silence that said more than words ever could. The pan sizzled softly, the coffee bubbled, but all I felt was the warmth of her leaning closer, the rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. When breakfast was finally ready, we ate side by side at the table, not speaking much, yet every glance, every brush of our hands as we reached for the same plate, carried a quiet certainty. There were no promises spoken aloud, No grand declarations. Just the understanding that something had shifted forever, that the walls we had built between us had finally fallen. And when she reached across the table at the end, her fingers resting lightly over mine, I knew that reward or not, I would gladly keep behaving, as long as it meant staying right there, in her warmth, in her presence, for as long as she'd let me. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, if you felt the slow build of tension and warmth, I'd love for you to support this channel by subscribing and leaving a comment below. Share your thoughts. Would you want to hear more stories like this? Your feedback means more than you know. 12.